Okay, so today, let me make sure this is working. We need to talk about advertising and pricing. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in this class is the fact that we are the only country, one of only two actually. There is another country that does allow direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products. And one of the reasons that, all right, that's good. One of the reasons I think that's important is because it's really highlights the ethical issues that are involved in advertising of pharmaceutical products in the really sensitive nature of what it is that we have the ability to influence our customers and consumers in a very vulnerable situation. And it's a situation in which all of us will at some point in time become a vulnerable population. And one of the things that the text says that I disagree with, or maybe old versions of the text, maybe they corrected it after they've watched my videos, is that autonomy, which is one of the issues that we think about when we talk about advertising and promotion, is violations of autonomy. That autonomy is not something that you have 1 minute and not the next. And I don't think that that is at all correct. I think that you can have autonomy with certain decisions in your life and not in other decisions in your life. And one of the ones that we'll watch is a cancer ad, which I think really, really highlights this issue. And I'm not sure that that CTCA is even still in business, but the ad is one that I think is classic in terms of its ability to impact a very vulnerable population. So what I mean by autonomy is not something that you can have 1 minute and not the next. And the text says that that's the case, that autonomy is not something that you have in one situation and not the next, is that if you are, for example, a sophisticated business owner, you may, who has been diagnosed with cancer, you may be able to, up until the point that my mother died, she was making decisions about her business. You may be able to function with regard to that aspect of your life and not make good decisions with regard to your health care because you're overly emotional in that situation. And so these are things that I think that we really need to think about. So these ads are important in that they influence behavior and I think have the ability to really, really go out and both do a lot of good and a lot of harm. And why do I say that? I think that one of the things that advertising does as a tool is it provides information and it may lead to the destigmatization of certain conditions. So historically speaking, if you went back in time, and you all don't remember this period of time, but I do remember a period of time where if you went to see a shrink or a psychiatrist or psychologist, if you want the clinical terms, you were viewed as maybe having something wrong with you, that you were crazy. There was a stigma associated with people who went to seek mental health counseling. As a result of advertising pharmaceuticals to the general public about depression, I think we have come to recognize that mental health issues are something that almost everybody faces at some point in your life. Now, the good part about that is that because we have recognized that mental health issues are important and that it is just an aspect of healthcare overall, like any others, we don't cast moral judgment, for example, about people who have broken their hip and need a hip replacement. If you have advertisements for that, whereas in the past we did cast moral judgment, I think about people who went to see mental health practitioners. So I think we've overcome that stigma as a result of advertising. One of the problems, though, on the flip side of that is that we have come to believe in this country, in the United States in particular, as a result of direct consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals, that every problem can be solved with a pill or some fast cure. If you have a weight problem, for example, now everybody is getting on these GLP-1s to try and deal with their weight problem. The truth of the matter is that maybe we just got finished with a holiday in which the entire holiday is dedicated to nothing but overeating maybe you shouldn't do that. And I say this as somebody who's guilty of that myself. I was painfully thin for most of my life until I hit about 40. And then something happens at that point in your life, and you can no longer continue to go to Outback and eat the bloomin' onion, the Caesar salad, the Outback special, the baked potato, and the chocolate thunder from down under without having some bad effects. Not just weight gain, but heartburn and indigestion. And as a result of the fact that we have pills for all of these things, we think that you just take a pill and it's suddenly magically cured. I'm not saying one way or another that you shouldn't get on GLP-1s to control weight, but how much research has there been on the side effects? Every drug has side effects. And so while advertising has helped us overcome stigmatization of things like mental health issues, it's also created a culture in which we believe that everything can be fixed with very little effort. And that's just not necessarily the case. So advertising has the ability to influence and impact culture and society in very positive ways. Just like a hammer can be used to build a home, you can also use a hammer to bludgeon somebody to death. And advertising can be used in extremely negative ways that I think overcomes personal autonomy. So let's look at some ads. Not all advertising that has even won awards is necessarily effective. So I think I've maybe shown you, have we looked at the herding cats ad in here before? Yeah. It's worth watching even if we have watched it before, because it's one of the ads that won an award. And I think it's a great ad in one respect and maybe not necessarily a great ad in other respects. But it is, it won awards the year. It was a Super Bowl commercial. So we're going to come up pretty quickly. I spent all of Thanksgiving. My family is obsessed with sports. And so I spend an enormous amount of time watching sports. And during Thanksgiving, what do you really watch? What kind of sport do you watch? Right. So this was a Super Bowl commercial from like 1986, I think. And it was an award-winning commercial. Super Bowl commercials used to be really, really incredibly creative. I haven't seen any that I've thought in the last 5 years that I thought were just exceptionally creative. People who didn't watch football used to watch the Super Bowl, not necessarily for the Super Bowl, but because it was such a huge day in advertising. That has somewhat changed in that we now get our information on our phones. And so they have had to come up with new and creative ways of influencing the way that they present information to you by giving you Angry Birds for free if you'll watch the ads and things like that. So I don't know that Super Bowl is all as big as it used to be, although it's still an enormously expensive ad buy. If you're buying advertising on the Super Bowl, it's still an enormously expensive proposition. So we'll look at this ad. I think it's a really funny ad. Like I said, it did not, we'll talk about what the problem is with the ad. What do you all think of that ad?
Creative, but I don't know what they do.
Ah, okay, you don't know what they do. It's worse than that. Most people couldn't remember the company. 15 minutes after they were asked about the ad, they couldn't remember. You all probably remember which company it was. Do you remember which company it was?
EDS.
EDS. Does anybody know what EDS is? EDS was started by a guy named Ross Perot. He was a billionaire. He was probably the first billionaire to run for president. He ran for president in 1992 when Bill Clinton was elected, and he probably is the reason that Bill Clinton was elected. So he was a billionaire, and he ran as an independent, and he pulled enough votes away from George Herbert Walker Bush, which was Poppy Bush, that he allowed Clinton to become the plurality winner. And in an electoral college where most of the states have a winner-take-all system, that allowed Clinton to win. Clinton probably would have lost that race if Ross Perot hadn't been in it. But he pulled enough away from the Republicans because he was this billionaire who represented sort of that country club Republican subset, and they were unhappy with the way things had gone with George Herbert Walker Bush enough that they cast enough votes away from him, and he won that, or he managed to allow Bill Clinton to win that election with a plurality at the vote. So Bill Clinton was kind of an unelectable guy, but Ross Perot owed EDS, and they were a information technology and tech company, and he was an interesting guy when he ran for president. He was a little short guy. You all don't remember Ross Perot. He had these big ears, and he said, well, now he said lots of creative things. He said, if anybody has any good ideas on how to do this, the difference between me and those people in Washington is that I'm all ears. And of course, he had these huge ears, and so everybody thought that was funny. And then another line that he said in a debate was, now, if I go into some country so that we can replace and put back in some emir and put gold fixtures back on his bathroom, just drag me out the White House and shoot me. And everybody thought that was a great line. And Bush had become enormously kind of controversial over his war in the Gulf, the first Gulf War. So when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and the reason that they did it largely was because Kuwait kept busting the quota, and Iraq needed the prices of oil to be stabilized and stay high enough that they could fight in a war with Iran. And every time the price of oil would go up, Kuwait would bust the quota, and they would, basically force the price of oil back down, because oil is one of those commodities that floats on a world market. And if there's one barrel of oil too few, the price of oil does what? It shoots way up. If there's one barrel of oil too much, the price plummets and it falls. And so Kuwait, every time the price would get high, you have an incentive to cheat, right? And they would turn the tap and the price of oil would fall. And Iraq finally got tired of that, and they just kind of invaded Kuwait. And we went over there. Initially, George W. Bush said, we're fighting for democracy. And those of us who were political scientists took out a map and couldn't find a democracy in that region except for Israel, and Kuwait was not Israel. So then it was, we're fighting for aggression. The real reason we were fighting is we didn't want the Iraqis to control those oil fields. That's the real reason, in my opinion, right? So Ross Perot says these funny things. He's got this company. There's a book that came out when the Iran hostage crisis occurred. Some of his employees were captured as part of that, and he sent his own team, basically, of special forces over there to free his people. And I think the book is called On the Wings of Eagles. I think that's the book that details it. So why is that a somewhat of a good ad? It meets one of the two criteria, but not a great ad. Well, great ads do two things, in my opinion. Having studied advertising for a long period of time, I've sort of distilled down the literature on advertising into, these are the things great ads do. They engage the mind of the consumer, and they deliver a selling message. That ad clearly engages the mind of the consumer. Why does it engage the mind of the consumer? It creates cognitive dissonance, which creates interest, because you have this image of the American cowboy, which is deeply ingrained in the American psyche. And he's doing something that is not typically associated with the American cowboy, which is taking care of cute and fuzzy little kitties and bringing this herd of short hairs into town. And so it creates this curiosity and that you want to watch it. It tells a little story. It's like a little mini movie. But nobody remembered what the company was. Nobody remembered what the selling message was after that ad. Now they said it at the end. EDS, what we do is we bring, ideas and people together, whatever. Is that what the ad is about? I understand from technology people historically at that time that one of the things that they used to say is it's kind of like herding cats. Because there are several ways that you can program, not several, there's a couple ways. You can do it scientifically or you can sort of engage in cowboy programming. And so a lot of times they would say things like it's like herding cats in that field. So maybe it did hit the target audience, but I don't know. Nobody really remembered the ad after it was over. So great ads, engage the mind of the consumer, which it clearly did, deliver a selling message. I'm not sure it did that. I'm not sure that it produced any ROI for the company in terms of what it did, in terms of making a selling message. Let's watch this one. This is one that I'm very critical of, and CTCA, I think, has gone broke. What'd y'all think of that ad? I wish I could find the original ad. Peggy in the original ad says, I've looked and looked and looked to try and find the original ad, which was 10 years previous to that one, where she says, my doctor came in and told me I had pancreatic cancer. And I said, well, what do we do? And he said, well, Peggy, you're going to die. And then I went to CTCA and they gave me hope. The truth of the matter is, if you are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, you're probably going to die. There are very few cures for pancreatic. In fact, I don't think you ever get cured. It may go into remission. There are two types, as I understand. I have a cousin who is a medical doctor and a PhD, and so he's a mudfud. He studies cancer, and that was what he does. He's an oncologist. That's the specialty in medicine that deals with cancer. And when he was young, he decided he was going to study pancreatic cancer. There are sort of two types. The most common type, you find out and you die very, very quickly. In fact, I had two friends, both of whom taught here at UCO, who found out, and within a few months, they both retired from the College of Business a year apart from each other, and both of them found out that they had pancreatic cancer, which sort of made me wonder if I should even be in this building. You know, is there something in this building that's causing it? I don't know, probably not. But you die fairly quickly because pancreatic cancer has absolutely no symptoms until it's really too late to treat it. And what my cousin has told me when he went into this field, that he would be part of the generation that solved the problem. And he's not. I mean, it's not going to be solved. He doesn't think it will be solved in his lifetime. Now, maybe with genetic advances, it may, in fact, be solved in his lifetime. But it certainly was not solved by the time that he thought it would be solved. He's now approaching, he's, I think, 15 years older than I am. And so he's obviously approaching retirement because I'm approaching retirement rapidly. And so, you know, I don't think he's going to be on the team that will solve this problem. This ad highlights one of the things that I think about when I think about, is the will overborne? And whether or not the ad is truthful, or whether or not it creates false senses of hope in people. I have noticed now, I used to say that if you were diagnosed with something like pancreatic cancer, you probably don't want to go to CTCA, which didn't have all that great results, and I don't think is actually still in business anymore, or if they are, they've changed their, I think they've changed their name. There used to be a center in Tulsa. It's not a CTCA center anymore. So, how did that happen? Let's go from this screen. Hold on one second. I just gotta bring back up the PowerPoint. It's not working. Oh, my PowerPoint's not coming back up. There we go, came back. Issues of autonomy and why I think these are problematic and things like the CTCA, Adam. What is autonomy? What does it mean to be autonomous? And why can I say that you can have autonomy in one aspect of your life and maybe not in another aspect of your life? Again, I think the cancer ads highlight this issue enormously well. My mother died of cancer. And so when she was dying, she was still running her business. She was making good business decisions, I think. But she wasn't necessarily making the most rational decisions with regard to her healthcare. It was up to my brother and I to say things like, well, that may not be the best idea. Because if you're dying of cancer, you're probably pretty scared. And you're relying on people who have a lot more knowledge and expertise than you do to give you advice, but you may not really be able to filter out the noise and deal with that advice in sort of the best way. So what does it mean to have autonomy and be able to make rational decisions for yourself? Again, the text used to say, and I've tried to look and see if I can find it and see if it still says this, that autonomy is, again, not something that you have 1 minute and not the next, but I think it is something that you can have in one respect of your life and maybe not in another. So what is it that constitutes an autonomous decision? what allows you to make an informed decision. How do you distinguish between puffery and fact in these decisions regarding advertising? Lots of advertising doesn't necessarily involve these critical decisions, but even decisions that don't seem to be as critical as whether or not to go to CTCA versus going to the Mayo Clinic or to MD Anderson in Houston, which is probably the best cancer treatment center in the United States. And MD Anderson didn't advertise for years. They do now, which is sort of interesting to me that they've started advertising. But I think more than anything, they advertise to try and bring awareness to cancer and to get people to donate to cancer research rather than trying to drum up business for, patients to come there. What does it mean to have autonomy? Well, I think there are sort of three prongs to the test that allow you to distinguish between puffery and fact in making a decision and making an autonomous decision. So what are those factors? Well, this is what is called an elements test, where you need to meet every element of the test rather than a factors test where you sort of weigh factors and maybe no factor is dispositive. If you don't have all three of these elements, I don't think you have autonomy, right? So the first element is that it's a knowing decision, that the decision is made with sufficient awareness. Now, this element is very easy to satisfy. Are you awake? When they come in at the hospital and they bring you all these forms. So I broke my hip several years ago and I had a hip pin. I had it pinned and decompressed. So I still have my hip. They bring in all these forms and they give them to you right before you're going into surgery. And do you have any idea? I mean, yeah, you're conscious, you're awake, you're there, you're present. So do you know what you're doing? Kind of, I guess. Knowing is pretty you know that these are forms, and I think that you have some idea about what the forms say. Basically, they say what? What do you think these forms that they're asking you to sign right before you go into surgery say? Yeah, it's all about liability. It's all about protecting them from the liability, which is to say that there are risks associated. Now, do you really understand the risks that are associated? I'll give you an example of this. I had when I was the equity affirmative action officer for the university, they put this guy under me, and I killed him. Not literally, but he would come in every day and he would tell me that he was going to take off and he was going to go have this surgery, and he was very concerned about it. He had this little growth on his ear, and what it was doing was it was affecting his equilibrium, and literally he would be standing there and then all of a sudden just kind of fall over, because your ear and the inner ear contains a part of your balance. It's what lets you know that you're upright, and it was all messed up because of this little growth that he had on this part of his inner ear. And he came in every day and was telling me about how he was concerned. And finally, after about the 8th or 9th time that this guy came in, I said, you're going to be fine. Like, suck it up. You need to have this surgery done. You're falling over. Like, you'll be fine. People go into surgery every day. We don't live in the third world. And, you just need to get this over with and move on down the road. Well, he went in and he had the surgery. And at 90 seconds, he coded. He had an anaphylactic reaction to the anesthesia, and he died. So of course, you know, I was the one who basically said, look, Steve, you need to have the surgery. You need to go do this and get over it. You'll be fine. And it turns out Steve wasn't fine. And I felt an enormous amount of guilt over that for a long time, but I wasn't really thinking about it after, you know, a year or so. And then 15 years later, I break my hip and I'm having surgery, and all of a sudden this image comes back to me of Steve. I'm laying there about to go have surgery, and they bring the forms in, and I broke out in a cold sweat because it all of a sudden hit me like, you know, karma's a horrible thing. And I'm like, I'm gonna die. Because I told Steve that he'd be fine, and Steve died, and now here I am. I'm about to have surgery. I'm probably gonna code on the table. This is like, you know, this is karma coming back to bite me. And I broke out in a cold sweat, and I'm a lawyer. Do you think I had time to read all of those forms that basically say things like anesthesia is a risk and you could die and there's no guarantee, right? I mean, it's not just about the anesthesia, it's also about the substantive matter of the surgery that they're going to do on your body, which is they don't guarantee that you won't be crippled after this. That's a risk. When you have hip surgery, one of the risks that could happen is, like, you know, maybe you don't die, but you're horribly crippled for the rest of your life. If they do a full hip replacement, you can only have 2 of those. I had a friend who had this done, and the first one that she had, the reason they did not do a hip replacement on mine when I broke it is because, which is what they normally do, but I was in my 40s. And if they do that, you can only do 2 hip replacements. And so they last about 20 years, which means that at 60, they would probably have to do another one. And then if you live another 20 years, you're just in a wheelchair, right? And people live to be 80 all the time. Most of the people in my family have long lives. They live a long time. And so the doctor was like, we want to do this, but you could be crippled for life. So yeah, you know that you're signing something. You're awake. They're not signing it for you. It has to be, the second prong is it has to be voluntary. Again, this is a pretty easy prong. They're not writing it for you. They're not putting a gun to your head and saying, I mean, you don't have to sign the forms. If you don't sign the forms, is it really voluntary? Like, if you don't sign the forms, they're not going to do the surgery. The forms that basically say, we could cripple you, you could die. Is it really voluntary? They're not putting a gun to your head, literally, and saying, sign the forms or we're going to blow your brains out. But is it voluntary? You don't sign the forms, you don't release them from liability, which, by the way, I'm not sure the forms are really all that beneficial, because if they screw up, you're going to sue them. And the forms are probably not going to help them. You know, the forms that they give you 5 minutes before you go into surgery, that like, I'm a lawyer and literally they're asking you to sign these forms right before you go. Do you have time to read these forms? No. They're like very fine print, right? And you just sign the forms that basically say, you know, like, it's risky. It's inherently risky. We could kill you. We could maim you. But in theory, it's voluntary. The third prong, and this is the most important one in making an autonomous decision and being able to determine whether or not something is puffery or fact, whether or not it's deceptive or not, is intelligence. Is the decision that you are making regarding undertaking treatment at CTCA intelligent? What constitutes an intelligent decision? And this is where you run into a lot of problems and maybe run into a problem with violations of autonomy. You see the ad for CTCA and you see Peggy, I'm gonna tell you, Peggy died of pancreatic cancer, right? You see that ad and you think, gosh, I don't have pancreatic cancer. I have something else. Maybe they can cure me. If it was intelligent, if it was an intelligent decision, what would you do? Well, one of the reasons that I'm divorced is because I have a tendency to be a rational, comprehensive individual. And so I become apoplectic and blow up when people don't sort of become rational, comprehensive. So one of the things that we say in America is just common sense. Just good old-fashioned common sense. When you're diagnosed with cancer, there's no such thing as common sense. We want to believe there is. Watch the ad, listen to Peggy, go to CTCA. No, wrong. What is a rational, comprehensive, intelligent decision? There is no such thing as common sense. There is rational, comprehensive thought, and there is magical thinking. I'll give you an example. Again, why I'm divorced. Our microwave went out. We bought a new home. And so I start compiling a notebook on what we want in terms of a microwave. Now, when I was a kid, buying a microwave was a major purchase. So I remember the first microwave my family bought. It cost $1,000. This was in 1970 something. $1,000 was a lot of money in the 1970s. It cost $1,000 and it had two dials. One dial was for power. And so you had like 50% power and 100% power. There was like two things that you could switch the dial to. You could go 50%, and then the second dial was a timer on the device. So you would set the power that you wanted, which was basically like defrost, and then or 100% power, which was full on, and then you turn the dial for the timer, and it ran for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, up to I think it went up to 30 minutes, which you never cook anything in a microwave for 30 minutes. I mean, you don't need to cook anything in a microwave for 30 minutes. And it was a horrible device. It didn't really, it would like cook stuff, but it would be, because at that point in time, the microwaves didn't have the turntables that they have now. So like half of your food would be scalding hot and the other half would still be frozen. So basically what the microwave was a really good device for heating up water. That's what you could do with a microwave, really. You could like heat up water with this device, which by the way, you shouldn't do. And you want to know why you shouldn't heat up? Lots of people heat up like coffee and water and stuff like that in the microwave. You know why you shouldn't do that? Because it will bring the water to a temperature without boiling it, where it's above the boiling point. And when you break the surface tension of the liquid, it can actually explode and burn you. Not a good idea, right? So anyway, this microwave cost like $1,000. There weren't a whole lot of options. There weren't a whole lot of brands out there. We bought it because it was the newest. My father is fascinated with anything that's new and technological, and we had to have this microwave. Didn't really do anything. Microwaves now are far more sophisticated than that. They have all kinds of different settings, and so I'm starting to compile the notebook on what it is that we want in terms of microwave. So what are some of the things that microwaves do now? Well, they've got a turntable. They all have a turntable now, because if you don't have the turntable, the microwave will heat something up so that it's blazing hot on one side and frozen on the other. But they also have things like a popcorn feature. Bagged popcorn, when I was a kid growing up, the way you made popcorn was you put it in a skillet with a little bit of oil and you shook it over a stove, or you had a popcorn popper that you shook over the stove, which was the screen thing that you would use to heat it up. Or you bought like this wonderful device which had an air heater that would like spin the popcorn around and then shoot it out the top of this thing. And it would heat up the butter at the same time. You put the butter on the top, and that's the way you did it. Well, microwave popcorn has become a big deal, right? Make all kinds of different So there's a button on the microwave that says popcorn. So you just throw the bag of popcorn in there, you hit the popcorn button, and it goes. It will, I mean, they've got all these other different features and buttons. On some of the microwaves now, they have a keypad that goes 1 through, 0 through 9. And on some of the buttons, all you have to do is just hit, like, if you just hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, it will automatically just go to 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minute, 6 minutes, right? Like that's a feature that you can have on the micro. So I'm doing all of this like compiling, and I come home one day and my insignificant other, that would be my wife at the time, had bought a microwave. Why did you pick that microwave? It matched our appliances, which were all stainless steel. That was when stainless steel was a big thing. Like everybody wanted stainless steel appliances. Did you consult the notebook? No, I didn't consult the notebook. Why didn't you, like, I have a notebook, like of all the research I've done on why we want, like, these, like, I hate popcorn. Like the popcorn feature means nothing to me because I hate it. Don't want it. Did you consider? No, it matched our appliances when we microwave. That's rational comprehensive thought, right? Like, no, what she did was not rational comprehensive thought. It was like, I bought it because it's pretty. No. Wrong. Like, you need to consult the notebook. There is intelligent thought. Like, so if you're going to make a decision about Cancer Treatment Centers of America, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to download all of their facts and figures and figure out who has like the best results for the type of cancer that you have. And it ain't CTCA. Who is it? It's MD Anderson. But does anybody do that? No. Why not? Because the will is overborne. We want to have hope. And that's when advertising, the question is the will overborne? Lots of stuff, we can make these decisions and the will is probably not overborne. But some of these things, it becomes really, really critical. And we really need to ask ourselves as marketers, are we, and can you possibly, in a 1-minute ad for CTCA, provide enough information for somebody to make a rational, comprehensive decision about their? No, you can't. Yeah.
Is matching appliances not a rational decision? I think aesthetics are a rational decision, personally speaking.
That is perhaps
Having a
one
matching kitchen,
I mean, like-
I think it's
like,
a rational
this is-
decision.
you need to base these decisions on a totality of the circumstances. And yes, matching is maybe one aspect of a totality of the circumstances, but you have to go beyond that. One of the things that I've written in your essays for your exams is you need to think about the totality. You're not thinking about everybody in these. So one of the essay asks you about, I use my family members, I'll just tell you, in all of these. So I think and I use real like fact patterns to some extent. My father's still alive. So I think in one of the essays I talk about Jim Mazza, who's a retired agent. That's my stepdad. He's a retired FBI agent, special agent in charge of the field office in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Went out to Santa Fe for Thanksgiving to see him. So I talk about Special Agent Jim Mazza gets on this. He doesn't have any, by the way, 50% of the people who die of heart attacks, their first symptom of heart disease is the heart attack that kills them, right? So I talk about that, you know, and you all write these little essays and stuff, and I say things like, did you think about what is the totality of the circumstance? Every decision a business makes affects not just the business, but a wider community, right? I mean, how do you measure the impact that a human life has beyond the immediate family? And that's where a lot of people fail at this, is that you don't think about, like, it's not just his impact on his family and his ability to provide for his family. It's also the other people that are impacted, and it's also everybody else that's affected by that business decision. If Frontier City, which I based the essay off of Frontier City, right? So the theme park, so I based it on my dad and Frontier City. If that business goes out of business because they make poor business decisions, it affects all of their employees. It affects a huge number of suppliers that rely on them to be in business. There's these ripple effects that you have to think about. So yeah, maybe pretty is one thing to think about, but did you go beyond, Robin? Robin, did you go beyond thinking? No. And this is really important. And ads like the CTC ad, you see Peggy. Peggy looks like a nice woman. I'm sure she is. She's bringing water to her horse. And don't we all feel good about that? Is the will overborne? I think the will was overborne by a lot of people who see that ad and think, I need to go to CTCA. If they can cure, if you saw the first ad, you knew that Peggy had pancreatic cancer. Wow. The problem is that using those kinds of heuristics, which are information shortcuts, can lead to really bad results. Now, what a lot of people would argue with me on the other side is that we can't possibly really do all of the research. I think if you have cancer, you need to do all of the research, right? And not rely on information shortcuts. Heuristics can get us a long way if the decision is not one that is critical. One of the problems is that we don't really think, because we're so programmed to hear things and see things and experience things. Not even 30 seconds is a lifetime now. That ad is a lifetime. What is it that you all have become trained to watching and finding information? It's not 30 seconds. It's TikTok videos that are 10 seconds long. How many of you are addicted? I've kind of become addicted to some of these. Like, I watch lots of airplane videos because I fly competitive aerobatics, right? So I watch a lot of, and people make all kinds of TikTok videos of airplanes. It's really funny. A lot of them involve airplanes crashing, you know. We now experience life like our attention span is that of a gnat. And when it comes to these really important decisions, we really, you know, I mean, is all of the CTCA ad fact? No, a lot of it is puffery. Whole, care, compassionate, you know, services. What does that mean? What does whole care mean? I don't know. What does that mean? Let's watch some of the ads that you guys
Okay, maybe I do.
gave me. The Coca-Cola ad. All right. Oops. Let's switch back. Hopefully it won't affect my screen this time. So why did you choose that ad? What do you think is great about that ad?
So I think it just builds emotional connection. And it just like part of the process because I feel like everyone associates Coca-Cola with Christmas. Well, Christmas with Coca-Cola right
Right.
now. So yeah, just building this emotional connection of connecting two things that not necessarily make sense together.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why everybody connects Christmas to Coca-Cola. I can tell you one of the things that started it. Probably this ad. Turtle Doves. They used to play those ads at Christmas all the time. I'd like to buy the world of Coke. In fact, I think they used to. Let's see if I can find the Christmas. Here it is. That morphed into. Doesn't that make you feel good? All American. What was the first product we sent to communist China after it was opened up by Richard Nixon? After the Nixon administration, the Carter administration came in, the first product we sent to communist China was. Hold on. Should you drink Coke? You can use it to clean battery cables.
It's a tasty cleaner.
Huh?
It's a tasty cleaner.
It's a tasty cleaner. Not sure that's the best thing for you. Again, is the will overborne? Should anybody like, I used to be addicted to Diet Coke. I drank probably 12 Diet Cokes a day. It's a lot of Diet Coke. You can clean off the corrosion on your battery cables with Coke. Think about what that's doing to your insides. Again, is that an intelligent decision? Maybe the decision to not drink Diet Coke was the intelligent decision. But it's highly addictive. I was definitely addicted to Diet Coke. Why? I don't know. Caffeine, that sweet taste. Yeah. So let's see, we came up with this commercial. That's not it. The Gulf Coast. So why do you hate that? Why do you hate that?
Cause it's so blatant and cynical. The company be like, you forgive us, don't you? Please
Right, but
forgive
it,
us.
I mean, it sounds like they've, like, what did they say, $5 billion? That was a trillion, oh, 20. That was a $1 trillion disaster.
They make it seem like, oh, but it's doing it out of the goodness of our hearts. Ignore the fact that we are forced to do this.
Right.
Because we messed up.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I just hate it, so.
Okay. But again, does it sort of overbear the will and make us think, I mean, like, you hear these numbers, right? What did you say, 20 billion? 20 billion, 200 million in research fund. How far does that go? Literally, $1 trillion. I mean, like, do we really fully understand the environmental impact that spill had? I mean, how do you really quantify that? You know, how do you, I mean, we know what the cleanup costs are, but how do you quantify, you know, the waitress who lost her job because the restaurant had to close because nobody could go to, you know, whatever beach it is, you know, Gulf Shores for spring break. And the suffering that caused. I don't know. It's, you know, again, advertising has this ability to influence, and we really need to think about what it is that we're doing in terms of that influence. We also need to talk about today, before I finish, the place promotion, the place part of marketing. So historically speaking, this involves logistics and power in the channel. Historically speaking, the manufacturers of products had all of the power in the channel because they set the initial price. Walmart changed that, in that they became so big that they were able to go to manufacturers and say, this is what we're going to pay. And to some extent, that helped all of us because what did it do? It started limiting prices. Now, a lot of things, you know, that price is inconsequential, but on big ticket items, it can become very consequential. Walmart, at one point in time, this is no longer the case because of Amazon, but at one point in time, I think, was the largest retailer, the largest seller of textiles, soap, groceries, and diamonds. You don't think of Walmart when you think of diamonds, do you? They were largest retailer of diamonds at one point in time in the world. That's enormous power. And they were able to go to manufacturers. Historically, again, the manufacturers set the initial price, and then as it went through the channel, through the intermediaries, they added value in terms of the utilities like time, place, you know, packaging, form, utility. And all of that got added in until you finally got to the retailer. Walmart completely upended the power by becoming so big that companies had to deal with Walmart, right? Now, is that an ethical issue? Well, it may be when you start basically telling manufacturers that you have the ability to put them out of business if they don't sell to you at the price that you want them to sell. And there are people who have said no to Walmart and then had to change that course. So years ago, about 15 years ago, an article came out that was called The Man Who Said No to Walmart. And it was Snapper Mowers. Walmart at the time wanted to sell mowers for about $100. That's what they figured the Walmart customer price point was. That's what the customer wanted to pay, was about $100. So they were told Snapper, you got to sell us these mowers because they got to mark it up. 100%. You gotta sell us these mowers for $50. And Snapper said no. Because Snapper they viewed that as if they could sell a mower for $100, brand dilution. It was gonna diminish their brand. Because what does the average Walmart customer do when they buy a Walmart mower? Historically, at that time, they would buy a mower, it'd last for 1 or 2 seasons, and then they'd have to do what? Buy another mower. That's what happened with, who was the brand that Walmart sold mostly at that time? It was called Murray, I think. And the typical Murray mower would last 1 year, 2 years, maybe. Now, I mean, in theory, you could, maintain it and put it in the garage and, but the average Walmart customer didn't do that. They just, buy another mower. It's disposable. Snapper wouldn't do it. Several years after that article came out called The Man Who Said No to Walmart, another article came out that highlighted the fact that they'd relented and were now going to sell their products to Walmart. That's an enormous amount of power, isn't it? To be able to demand what you're going to pay. Could you imagine going into Walmart and saying, I don't want to pay that. I think I'll pay half of the price that you want to charge. They wouldn't do that, would they? Would they negotiate with you on that? Another issue that comes up when we talk about the logistics or the place part of marketing. So marketing, we historically organize around 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion, right? Is the targeting of vulnerable populations. This was seen in things like the subprime mortgage industry. What was it? If you wanted to buy a home, historically, you had to have a fully documented loan application. What did that mean? It meant that bankers who were going to loan you money to buy a home on a 30-year mortgage, which, by the way, one of the things that the Trump administration has decided that they're going to do as an idea to try and lower costs is go from a 30-year mortgage to a what? 50-year mortgage. Almost universally, economists think that is a horrible idea. Is a 30-year mortgage a good idea? I don't know. You're going to work the majority of your life. Does anybody actually make it to 30 years? Does anybody actually own their home? I do. But I'm very unusual in that my home is paid off. It's been paid off. But I inherited it, right? Yeah.
I like to brag. My wife and I bought our house in 2020 with a 3% interest rate, and we already own 75% of it.
Okay. All right. Well, you're not selling the house, right?
No. We're planning on paying it off and then becoming the bank for it.
That's unusual. Most people, what's the average home? 5 years, or it was. It's changing now. It's now going up. The number of years that people are living in homes is going up. When interest was cheap, people would you'd buy a home, you'd get a better job, decide you need a better home because we create monuments to our stuff, right? It's called our house. Does anybody need, the 4,500 square foot McMansion in the gated community in the shallowest town in America called Edmond? No. And when we fill that up with all of our stuff, do we get rid of our stuff? No, we buy a bigger home so we can get more stuff to put in that house, right? Well, when interest was cheap, people were trading homes like you trade toothbrushes. But now that interest rates are no longer at 3% or less, people are holding on to things a little bit longer. They started advertising, stated income loans, which meant that they no longer fully documented the loan. You just told them what you made. Used to be when people bought a mortgage or they got a mortgage on a home, they had to tell the bank where they got that income from. I work at the University of Central Oklahoma. I'm a tenured full professor, and the bank would verify that by asking for, tax returns and pay advices. That's what it's called now, since we no longer give you a live check. It's called a pay advice. And then they would call and say, is Grant Aguirre likely to be employed here? Well, I've been employed here for a long time, right? So probably, yeah. And I have tenure. They wanted to know all of these things. But they started going in and selling these products with stated income in areas where populations are vulnerable. And again, are they making an intelligent choice? I don't know. Placing items, why is it that retailers place candy at the checkout stand? Particularly because kids who are by that time starving to death and tired lack impulse control. And their parents who have put up with them throughout, I mean, I hate going to Walmart. It is like the bane of my existence to have to, and I have found evidence for the fact that the Yeti exists, and they're in the Guthrie Walmart with their Yeti children in front of me. You know, they're tired, you're tired, it's impulse. And kids particularly, we know that your brain is not fully formed until you're 25. Lack impulse control. So placing that stuff on those end caps at the register triggers impulse buying. Is that ethical? You don't think about it all that much. It's just one candy bar. We have a crisis in this country. Young people are suffering heart attacks in record numbers now as a result of the over-processed and densely caloric foods that we are producing and making attractive at times when they are probably the most vulnerable. Well, I'm out of time. Thanks for the great semester. You guys have this week and next to do the fourth exam is open. So we will not be during finals week as you will be completing the exam and turning in your article reviews for the final class project. If you have any questions, give me a text, an email, a call. And if you did, I'll give you Doug's for coming up with ads today for those of you that did that. And you all have a good Christmas break.
The article review due tonight,
No, by Friday of finals week.
Friday, gotcha.